Well, it is a Monday, so hello and welcome to our weekly feature, Political Views. Ours is a young democracy, and many of the institutions that we need for it not only to survive, but indeed to thrive, have been and continue to be tested. That's the thrust of how the issues under discussion tonight are playing themselves out. And of course, we're joined in the studio by veteran legal journalist Tiso BlackStar Karyn Maughan to help us unpack some of them. Always a pleasure to have you with us. A very good evening to you. Karyn, let's start with the National Director of Public Prosecutions. I mean, nobody who's ever been in that office has completed a full term, and yet here we are looking for a new one.
Well, the interesting thing with the way in which the appointment of the NDPP is now being managed by President Cyril Ramaphosa is he's introduced a potentially precedent-setting and quite historic selection process. He's got people from the General Counsel of the Bar, he's got the Human Rights Commission, the Auditor General, Black Lawyers Association, the Law Society, representatives from the heart of the legal fraternity to interview the 12 candidates that have now been shortlisted through a process that whittled down, I think it was in excess of about 40 people, down to these 12 candidates. Interestingly enough, there is a legal battle brewing over this. The Right to Know has filed an urgent application which will be...
What's their objection?
Well, they're essentially saying that this matter needs to be in public. We know that the interviews are taking place on Wednesday, the 14th to the 16th, which is the Friday. Their Right to Know will be bringing an urgent application in the High Court to argue that the matter should be open to the media because it's not going to be. And a presidency filing an affidavit this afternoon saying that they have very specific reasons for believing that this process should not be open. Most importantly of all, of course, is they're saying essentially that this panel needs to be able to ask some pretty tough questions about sensitive matters, and that to open this process to public scrutiny would compromise that.
Right, let's look at some of the names. There they are on our screen. I mean, a number of them, of course, almost surprised me. Let's start with Glynis Breitenbach, for example. There is this idea that if the president were to appoint someone really from the opposition benches, although, of course, she had a good career at the NPA, was pushed out because of the Mdluli matter, it would send quite a signal if she were to get the nod.
Well, you would have a circumstance where, you know, any decision that she made which was controversial or took on people who were seen as sort of political targets from her organization, she could very well face arguments that she was biased should there be some form of review application. And I think the panel will be mindful of that. That's certainly a question that she will have to address. I think she would argue that she will just simply apply rule of law. But that perception, that idea of perceived bias, remember that our courts say it's not about whether you're biased, it's about whether you can be reasonably perceived to be biased. I think that will be a big playing point within her interview. Advocate
Silas Ramaite, always, always the bridesmaids, never quite the bride.
Well, I mean, there have been recent revelations in the media, you know, about a so-called sex tape, and, you know, he has come under fire over those kind of issues. But I know people within the NPA who are immensely supportive of him. I mean, one of the big criticisms that's come, you know, in the wake of this list is this is all old blood. You need to get new people into the NPA. You need to shake things up. But the counter-argument to that, of course, is that this institution is fundamentally dysfunctional, and people who have operated within the confines of the space are well aware of that dysfunction and may very well be better positioned to manage it.
And of course, I mean, there's different names. For example, I mean, Advocate Shamila Patoyi was at the ICC for a number of years. There's also this idea that some of the names on that list will not have been tainted by the last 10 years of dysfunction at the NPA.
Certainly she's got a brilliant reputation within the work that she did. And, you know, also a female candidate. It will be, if she's appointed, the first permanent NDPP. Of course, we know Nongobo Jiba was an acting, and there was a lot of controversy around that. Speaking to a number of the state advocates that I have, Andrew Chalke is one of the favourites that's been mooted. Rodney de Kock, also, both of them. Chalke is at the, you know, the Johannesburg, the Gauteng DPP. Rodney de Kock is head of the Western Cape DPP, highly regarded. The Western Cape has been at the forefront of pursuing a lot of kind of controversial corruption matters, not least of all, the matter involving the former Western Cape Police Commissioner, Arnie Lumbuya. He's got a very good reputation, is quite solid. Advocate Andrea Johnson, of course, a stalwart within the Oscar Pistorius matter, going to be interviewed by Barry Rue, who, of course, is the representative for the General Counsel of the Bar, and I'm sure that's going to be fun.
Well, a surprise inclusion has been certainly Advocate Moipone Noko, seen as very much a part of the faction, if you would even call it that was aligned to the former President Jacob Zuma.
She dropped a case involving one of his wives about, an issue with a domestic helper. She also, Sean Abrams, reviewing and overturning her decision not to pursue a corruption case involving Thoshan Pandey, who is a sort of self-professed friend of Jacob Zuma, was reportedly in business with his son, Edward. Sean Abrams looking at that decision, reviewing it and overturning it. Of course, Thoshan Pandey now fighting to review the Abrams decision. So she is somewhat of a controversial choice. She is someone who has been seen, rightly or wrongly, as a Zuma loyalist. And she has been, the subject of several kind of scathing legal arguments in terms of the decisions that she's made in the past.
So from this list of 12, 3 names then will be the final list from which the president will choose. Let's move on to another story that's certainly growing legs by the day, the so-called battle, if you like, between the Public Protector Busisiwe Mkhwebane and the Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan. I mean, firstly, there's this idea that it's almost reminiscent of the kinds of things that Pravin Gordhan was put under, particularly during the time of Jacob Zuma as head of state. It seems in a very odd way we're back there, given the timing and also the utterances in no less than tweeting that Mkhwebane has been making.
I think the unfortunate thing is that she can be, at very best for her, accused of attempting to mislead the public about Minister Gordhan not wanting to answer questions. And I mean, that's a very serious allegation to make against a minister by a Chapter 9 institution, given the constitutional prerogatives that those institution has. I mean, effectively, she was accusing Gordhan of defying her and defying the Constitution. Of course, we see now a kind of backpedaling on that position, saying that while he didn't personally answer the questions,
it was his attorney,
which, legally speaking, is a bizarre argument to make. We know that people in those kind of positions will routinely make use of legal representatives to deal with these kind of matters, and to suggest that that amounts to a defiance from him is simply, completely untoward.
I mean, we know there have been a lot of issues raised about Busisiwe Mkhwebane, for example, her views in the Bancorp matter, an action that she herself at some point, abandoned. Where does this lead the conversation about her fitness to hold office if once again she's embroiled in something like this?
Well, crucially, the Constitutional Court is hearing her appeal on the 27th of November against a personal costs order that was made against her in regard to that Bancorp matter. Remember, she was tasked with investigating whether government had dealt adequately with these allegations of so-called apartheid-era looting, with the SARB, bailout that was given to Bancorp. She ultimately suggested that, ordered that the SIU then take steps to recover 1.2 billion rand from ABSA, which was the bank that took over from Bancorp. And importantly, and this was the thing that you referred to, she was forced to withdraw her recommendation or remedial action that the constitutional mandate of the Reserve Bank be changed so that it was no longer focused on protecting the value of the rand. Now, legally speaking, Bongani, that was completely, inappropriate, and anyone with basic legal training would know that you cannot order changes to the Constitution in that way and order Parliament to implement those changes. Of course, though that whole matter was being ventilated at a time where there was a profound kind of discursive battle playing out and still playing out between the so-called white monopoly capital and state capture factions, about these two opposite sides of and various accusations playing out. So it was perceived in a kind of political way. So this aspect of investigation, preliminary investigation, she says, suggesting that she hasn't made a formal decision on whether to pursue it against Gordhan, I think she is really going to have to prove and show the South African public that this is a legitimate investigation and it's not being shaped by political aims here.
Not least because he's meant to appear before her on the eve of his appearance at the Zondo Commission, and almost all that we've heard in a way from his side comes out of that leak last week, and today the Commission dealing with leaks at the Commission. Judge Zondo there speaking about that.
I think it's important that a line has now firmly been drawn in the sand, because a number of the statements were leaked and published. Up until now, we haven't seen the Commission taking such a firm position, but they have highlighted the fact that within their regulations, you know, the dispersing this kind of information before the evidence is put before the Commission is an offence, and you can look at a potential fine and or jail sentence for it. So the Commission has not taken a hard line. They haven't gone after the journalists who did this, but they have said, look, we want cooperation, we want, you know, this is in the best interest of this process.
Now, I saw a headline also saying a hell of a week for Pravin Gordhan, because it's not only on that front that he needs to deal with things. The EFF have made their feelings about him quite known.
Well, this has been coming for quite some time. I mean, I was outside the Pretoria High Court when Julius Malema was challenging the Riotous Assemblies Act legislation that has been used to prosecute him for allegedly inciting people to occupy land. And at that stage, he was calling Pravin Gordhan the de facto president, suggesting that there were certain elements within the ANC.
I mean, is it personal? Because one of the questions they've sent to him is whether or not he had any role in Malema's SARS matters all the way back up, 2010, all the way to 2014 even?
I think there is a personal element. I mean, we saw it playing out in the VBS EFF press conference where Malema made a number of allegations about the rogue unit spying on people, spying on him, and it was kind of
all... He still believes it was real.
Well, I think that's why, you know, there's currently a case in court involving the so-called rogue unit allegations and this evidence that, you know, the SARS may have been putting certain NPA officials under surveillance. Harry Nell's evidence is going to be very crucial. So I think that, you know, for the NPA's sake, in regards to the legitimacy of that investigation, they need to finalize that matter, and that trial needs to go ahead in a way that, you know, puts the line in the sand as to whether this is a legitimate investigation or is this just a throwback to something that was orchestrated against people or was aimed at getting to Gordhan.
And finally, very quickly, I mean, he has made it clear that there is a fight back based on what he's been doing to try and clean up state-owned enterprises. He sees all of this action against him as part of that.
Yes, and I mean, I think what's going to be interesting with his evidence is, you know, he said a number of things on affidavit, but it's when people are actually giving their testimony before the Commission, as we've seen with Barbara Hogan today, that a lot of the kind of emotion, the frustration and the anger comes out. And I think, you know, Pravin Gordhan's statement is actually quite conservative given the things that he was involved in, given, you know, his dealings with the sort of interministerial committee on the banks, his role in that. And I think what we may see when he actually does eventually give that evidence will be quite profound in terms of his own experiences of it.
Well, certainly Barbara Hogan didn't hold back today. Karyn Maughan, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for your analysis on this week's Political View. That was Tiso BlackStar's legal journalist, Karyn Maughan. We do, of course, welcome your responses. Remember the